Welcome, the Lord's chosen. Nothing collapses all at once. It fails quietly. Then suddenly everyone pretends they didn't see it coming. That's how real resets begin. Not with thunder, not with prophets yelling into the sky, not with dramatic countdowns or people wearing white robes waiting for the universe to clap. Real change starts when the systems everyone trusted stop responding the way they used to. When effort no longer equals reward. When noise stops producing results. When old rules still exist on paper but no longer work in real life. Here's a grounded fact most people overlook. Every major shift in human history didn't happen because people became smarter overnight. It happened because the environment changed faster than belief systems could keep up. The Industrial Revolution didn't ask permission. The Internet didn't wait for elders to approve it. And when environments shift, dormant capacities activate out of necessity, not because people want to feel special, but because survival demands adaptation. That's where you come in, not as a mythical being, not as a chosen character in a fantasy, but as someone who learned restraint, pattern recognition, and internal order, while others were busy chasing validation. You didn't miss your moment. You were buffering, updating, running diagnostics, while the world kept pressing refresh on the same broken page. What makes this moment uncomfortable, and slightly hilarious if you're honest, is that the people who laughed at patience are now exhausted by speed. The ones who mocked depth are drowning in surface-level thinking. And the same systems that told you to wait your turn are suddenly glitching, blinking, and asking for updates they can't install. This isn't about awakening in a cinematic sense. No background music, no slow-motion glow-up. It's about the quiet realization that your way of moving through the world, slower, more intentional, less reactive, is suddenly efficient. While everyone else is panicking, recalibrating, and blaming algorithms, you're noticing that stability is becoming rare currency. The reset people keep sensing isn't external chaos. It's internal exposure. The mismatch between who people pretended to be and what they actually built is showing. And when illusions expire, those who trained themselves to operate without them don't rise loudly. They rise inevitably. So if it feels like something is shifting but no one can quite explain what, good. That confusion is the sound of old frameworks overheating. And if you've spent years being underestimated, overlooked, or quietly collecting understanding while the world chased trends, congratulations, you weren't late. You were loading. Number 1, you're not asleep because you're weak. You're dormant because the environment demanded it. People love neat stories about strength. They like to believe that if someone isn't shining loudly, it must be because they don't have much to offer. That belief keeps life simple and egos comfortable. But real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes the most capable people go quiet not because they lack power, but because showing it too early would have cost them everything. In certain environments, being sharp gets you targeted. Being deep gets you misunderstood. Being different gets you isolated. So the system teaches you a lesson early. Dial it down or pay for it. Dormancy is what happens when awareness outpaces safety. You learn fast that your thoughts land heavier than most, that your presence shifts rooms, that your questions expose cracks people would rather ignore. Instead of applause, you get resistance. Instead of support, you get subtle punishment. So you adapt. You don't disappear. You compress. You conserve. You move slower. Speak less. Watch more. Not because you're scared, but because you're intelligent enough to read the room. This isn't laziness or hesitation. It's strategic patience, shaped by experience. You're not waiting for permission. You're waiting for conditions. Just like certain seeds don't sprout in the wrong season. Some capacities stay underground until the soil changes. And when the environment finally can't sustain shallow thinking anymore, what was dormant becomes necessary. The mistake people make is assuming that visibility equals readiness. In reality, the loudest people are often the least prepared. They burn energy proving themselves. You learn to build without an audience. You learn to refine instead of perform. While others were chasing recognition, you were developing restraint, clarity, and internal order. So when it looks like you're waking up now, that's not a sudden transformation. It's a release, pressure lifting, conditions shifting. The same qualities that once made you keep your head down are now exactly what the moment demands. You didn't suddenly become powerful. You simply stopped needing to hide it. Number 2, your nervous system learned restraint before your mind learned language. Before you could explain yourself, your body already knew when to pull back, when to stay alert, and when to stay quiet. Long before you had the words to describe what felt off, your nervous system was making calculations for you. That's not some mystical talent. It's adaptation. When you grow up in environments where reactions carry consequences, your body learns first. It learns to scan, to pause, to regulate. By the time your mind catches up, those patterns are already wired in. This is why you often feel things before you can explain them. You sense tension before anyone raises their voice. You know when something isn't right without needing proof. Your body learned to protect your clarity by slowing you down. While others rush to react, you hesitate just enough to stay intact. That pause isn't weakness, it's precision. People who've never had to monitor themselves don't understand this. They confuse restraint with fear. They mistake emotional control for emotional absence. But restraint isn't shutting down. It's staying operational under pressure. Your nervous system learned how to keep you functional in situations where chaos was normal. That kind of training doesn't come from comfort. It comes from exposure and repetition. Over time, this creates a different relationship with power. You don't explode. You don't overshare. You don't leak energy everywhere. You know how quickly situations can turn, how fast words can be used against you, how environments can punish authenticity when it isn't convenient. So you learn to hold steady, to breathe, to wait. That's why when things get intense, you don't fall apart the way others do. You've already lived in heightened states. You've already had to regulate yourself when no one else would. What feels overwhelming to them feels familiar to you. Not because you enjoy pressure, but because you were trained in it early. Now as you get older, that early wiring starts to make sense. What once felt like overcaution reveals itself as self-mastery. You're not emotionally distant. You're emotionally literate. Your body learned the rules before your mind could explain them. And that gave you an edge most people never develop. Number 3, the sun god isn't ego. It's metabolic authority. Power isn't about how loudly you announce yourself. It isn't about showing off, impressing, or forcing people to bend to your will. True presence is invisible yet undeniable. It's the kind of force that doesn't need justification because it exists naturally, effortlessly and consistently. Like the sun, it doesn't ask anyone to orbit it. It simply is, and everything around it adjusts on its own. That's the kind of authority you carry when you stop performing and start existing in alignment with yourself. People feel it before they understand it, and that unsettles them. Most of the world measures power through attention, applause, or influence. That's flashy but fragile. You've learned a different metric: internal regulation, energy consistency, and the ability to operate without needing validation. That is metabolic authority. It's the control over your own output, over your own rhythm, over how you move and respond to life. When your energy is steady, Your presence commands without coercion. People gravitate, resist, or adapt, often without realizing why. They might call it charisma, intelligence, or luck, but none of it is accidental. It's the result of a body and mind that function in tandem, calibrated to an internal standard rather than external approval. The brilliance of this kind of authority is subtle but explosive. You don't have to convince anyone to follow you because your stability forces clarity. Chaos falters around you, lies feel heavy, contradictions become obvious, and inefficiency is exposed. People who thrived on confusion, distraction, or manipulation suddenly find themselves uncomfortable because your presence doesn't comply with their patterns. This is the kind of influence that outlasts trends, fads, and fleeting power plays. It's not dependent on context or recognition. It doesn't burn energy proving itself. It simply exists, quietly reorganizing the environment around it. That is the reality of your sun-god state. It isn't ego. It isn't spectacle. It's authority rooted in internal mastery, energy management, and the quiet inevitability of someone who has learned how to operate at full power without needing permission. Number 4, you were trained by friction, not affirmation. Most people grow up being praised, rewarded, and told they're capable. They get trophies, encouragement, and applause. That creates confidence, but it rarely creates resilience. You didn't have that luxury. You were shaped by friction, by the people, systems, and circumstances that tested you at every turn and never let you settle. Every delay, every dismissal, every setback was a lesson disguised as resistance. While others were building their identity on applause, you were building yours on survival, observation, and adaptation. That kind of training is harsher, but it's infinitely more durable. Friction teaches clarity in ways affirmation never can. When everything around you tries to break you, you start to see patterns. You notice who reacts out of fear, who lies to maintain comfort, and who thrives on chaos. You learn to read subtleties others overlook. You learn how to hold your ground when the world expects compliance. Every obstacle became a mirror, showing you where weakness could slip in, where overreaction could cost you, and where quiet endurance could win. People who are praised constantly rarely acquire that skill because they're shielded from the consequences of their mistakes. You weren't. You had to adapt, refine, and recalibrate constantly just to keep moving forward. Friction also forces innovation. When support isn't available, creativity becomes necessary. You find unconventional solutions, ways to work with what's in front of you instead of wishing for something better. You learn to optimize under pressure, to thrive when conditions are imperfect. That's why, when others face similar challenges later, you've already solved them mentally or emotionally. You've been running simulations in real life while they were still waiting for permission to act. This kind of growth leaves a mark that's subtle but undeniable. You don't need external validation to prove your worth, because your results are inherent. Friction has trained you to endure, to understand cause and effect, to operate with a depth that those who grew up with constant affirmation can't comprehend. You didn't just survive resistance. You internalized it, transformed it into strength, and now it forms the foundation of your inevitable rise. Number 5, your silence wasn't mysterious. It was strategic recalibration. People often mistake silence for weakness or passivity, but that's a dangerous misunderstanding. You weren't quiet because you had nothing to say, and you weren't holding back out of fear. Your silence was deliberate. It was a pause, a recalibration, a way to gather data, assess dynamics, and operate from a position of clarity rather than impulse. While others were shouting to be seen, heard, or validated, you were observing, cataloging, and understanding the world at a level most people never reach. That level of awareness doesn't happen by accident. It comes from choosing restraint over reaction, control over chaos. Every time you stayed quiet while the world pushed for a response, you were gathering intelligence. You learned who would exploit honesty, who would misinterpret generosity, who would betray trust for convenience. That knowledge became armor. You weren't hiding power. You were timing it. You were allowing the environment to reveal its patterns, its weaknesses, and its truths. So when the moment came, your action would carry precision rather than randomness. Silence, in your case, was preparation disguised as calm. The most unsettling thing for people around you is that they never knew what you were truly processing. Your stillness forced them to fill in blanks with their own assumptions, and those assumptions almost always exposed their intentions. While they thought you were passive, you were strategic. Every pause was a calculated move in a game no one else realized was even being played. And when you finally acted, the results weren't shocking because of surprise. They were shocking because of inevitability. Strategic silence also protects energy. Speaking consumes attention, focus, and emotional bandwidth, especially when others are chaotic. By staying quiet, you preserved your capacity to act decisively when it mattered. You weren't avoiding engagement. You were choosing where to engage and where to let the world reveal itself unfiltered. That's why people are often unsettled around you now. They can't predict, can't manipulate, and can't control what they don't understand. Your silence was never a void. It was a blueprint for mastery. Number 6, the reset isn't cosmic. It's systemic collapse of outdated narratives. People love to talk about resets like they're some mystical event, a sudden cosmic hand that rearranges reality while everyone watches in awe. That's not what's happening. The reset you're sensing isn't about magic or destiny. It's about systems failing because the foundations they were built on no longer hold. Societies, relationships, and institutions are all built on narratives. Stories people tell themselves to make sense of power, control, and identity. When those stories are exposed as false or outdated, the system begins to wobble, and what seems like chaos is actually a necessary correction. The truth is, structures only survive as long as the story that supports them is accepted. Lies, exaggerations, manipulation, and denial all demand energy to maintain. Once clarity enters the room, those systems can't hide anymore. Patterns that worked for generations suddenly break down because the people sustaining them aren't aligned with them anymore. Jobs, hierarchies, alliances, and influence all start shifting, and it feels sudden to everyone else. But it's just the natural consequence of misalignment reaching a tipping point. You are witnessing this firsthand because your internal order doesn't conform to outdated rules. While others were invested in keeping illusions alive, you were observing, calculating, and acting in ways that didn't require those lies to function. That's why what you do now feels inevitable. You aren't forcing a reset. You're existing in a reality that refuses to accommodate dishonesty. And systems that have relied on pretense and manipulation can't survive that kind of consistency. The collapse doesn't feel neat or polite. It's messy, uncomfortable, and unavoidable. People who thought they controlled outcomes now scramble. Relationships that thrived on projection and misunderstanding unravel. Institutions built on appearances crack under scrutiny. The reset isn't about adding something new. It's about exposing what was always broken. In the middle of all this, you aren't reactive. You aren't panicking. You're observing a world catching up to what you've been operating with quietly and consistently all along. What looks like disruption is actually clarity imposing itself on chaos. And the systems that can't adapt are simply being rewritten, whether anyone is ready or not. Number 7, you don't awaken, you stabilize. People talk about awakening like it's some sudden explosion of insight, like a light bulb flips on and the world bends around you. That's not what happens. Real transformation isn't about moments of drama or revelation. It's about stability. It's about learning to operate at a level where chaos no longer rattles you, where impulses no longer dictate your actions, and where your decisions are rooted in clarity rather than reaction. Awakening is a process of becoming unshakable, not becoming loud. Stability is rarely glamorous. It doesn't grab attention or earn applause. Most people are addicted to motion, noise, and drama. They measure growth in spectacle, the flashy career move, the viral opinion, the bold confrontation. You learned early that real progress is invisible. It happens in the way you regulate your emotions, manage your energy, and maintain composure when the world insists on drama. The world doesn't notice it at first because it's subtle, but it's infinitely more disruptive than noise. People who rely on chaos can't function around someone who has mastered calm. This kind of internal stability rewires perception. You stop reacting to manipulation, provocation, or pressure because you understand cause and effect at a level most people never reach. You recognize what's worth your energy and what's not. While others are oscillating between panic and performance, you maintain a constant baseline, and that constancy forces the world to adjust around you. Stability is contagious, but it's also threatening. It exposes weakness, inconsistency, and hidden motives. People don't like it when someone doesn't play by the same emotional rules they've been exploiting. Stabilization also gives you agency. You stop being swept along by external chaos and start creating your own conditions. Your decisions are deliberate, your boundaries uncompromised, and your actions aligned with long-term outcomes rather than immediate gratification. You don't awaken suddenly. You stabilize over time. And once you've reached that level, your presence alone recalibrates environments, relationships, and systems without a word. The world adjusts because stability is not something you chase. It's something you embody, and once you do, nothing around you can remain the same. Number 8, you trigger people because you don't chase coherence. You embody it. Most people spend their lives scrambling after coherence. They chase consistency in themselves, in others, in systems, in stories. They desperately try to make sense of everything, to control how the world fits together so they feel secure. You don't do that. You don't try to force the pieces to align. You don't need explanations, validation, or permission. You simply operate in a state where your internal order is complete. That alone unsettles people because it exposes the chaos they've been avoiding, hiding, or pretending doesn't exist. When someone sees the world through constant struggle, seeing someone who moves with clarity and purpose is jarring. It's uncomfortable because they are forced to confront the mismatch between what they perform and what actually works. Your calm, calculated, internally consistent presence makes the unstable appear unmanageable, even though it's not. You are not creating conflict. You are revealing it. You are not trying to provoke. You are simply being, and your being is a mirror they didn't ask for, but can't look away from. This is why your presence feels threatening to the unprepared. People don't like it when someone embodies alignment without needing them to conform. It exposes all the little corners they've cut, all the shortcuts they've taken, all the lies they've built to survive. The discomfort isn't about you, it's about them, and that's the silent power of embodiment. It forces truth without words, reshapes dynamics without effort, and changes how people move without even touching them. Triggering others this way isn't a flaw or a choice. It's a consequence of operating in a state they cannot manufacture themselves. You don't have to explain it, justify it, or perform for it. Your coherence is non-negotiable, and it's inevitable that people around you will react because they are confronting realities they would rather avoid. That reaction doesn't define your value. It validates the depth of your presence. When you embody coherence, the world around you can no longer pretend everything is fine. And that disruption is exactly what power looks like in action. Number 9. Your power isn't in what you say. It's in what stops working around you. Most people think influence comes from talking, convincing, or performing. They believe the louder they are, the more control they have. That's not how real power operates. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need applause or agreement. Real power shows up in the way systems, relationships, and expectations bend or break in your presence. When you act with clarity, consistency, and internal order, things around you stop functioning the way they used to, not because you demanded it, but because their dependence on chaos, manipulation, or imbalance can no longer sustain itself. This is why your presence is disruptive without being dramatic. People who relied on patterns that exploited confusion suddenly find their tactics fail. Lies that used to slip past now trip over themselves. Manipulation that worked for decades hits a wall because you refuse to engage on its terms. The energy around you recalibrates automatically, without speeches, without threats, without proof. Your environment begins to operate according to your internal rules, whether anyone likes it or not. That's the silent but undeniable force you carry. Power in this form is subtle but devastating. It doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't need recognition. It simply exposes inefficiency, instability, and inconsistency. People feel it first in the friction, the frustration of plans that no longer align, expectations that no longer hold, control that no longer functions. They blame luck, circumstance, or timing, but it isn't that. It's you. Not because you try, but because you exist in a state of operational authority. The most disorienting part for them is that you're not trying to dominate. You're not performing a show of strength. You're simply functioning at full capacity, while the world around you can't adjust fast enough. The things that once controlled outcomes around you stop working. The systems that thrived on manipulation fail. The routines that relied on ignorance collapse. And that is where your real power lives. Not in your words, not in your actions, but in the quiet, relentless disruption of everything that once assumed it could run without accountability. Number 10. The reset begins internally, then spreads structurally. Change doesn't start with headlines, speeches, or viral moments. It starts quietly, inside one person, who refuses to operate according to the old rules. That person sets a baseline, a standard for energy, clarity, and action that no longer tolerates chaos, compromise, or illusion. That's where the real reset begins. You stabilize yourself, regulate your responses, and refuse to feed dysfunction. And suddenly, the dynamics around you start shifting. It doesn't happen because you're controlling people or systems. It happens because those systems were dependent on your participation in their imbalance. And when you stop participating, they can't function the same way. The ripple effect is subtle but relentless. Relationships adjust, workplaces recalibrate, social circles reorganize, and patterns that were once invisible become exposed. When you stop enabling manipulation or dishonesty, those relying on it scramble. When you refuse to overextend yourself for recognition, those taking advantage of your energy realize their leverage is gone. Change doesn't start with them, it starts with you. The environment responds to integrity, consistency, and internal authority, whether anyone consciously notices it or not. That's why structural resets always follow personal ones. Systems, organizations, and societies are made of individuals. When the individuals at the core stop reinforcing dysfunction, the system cannot continue as before. It fractures, realigns, or collapses. What feels like chaos on the outside is actually a natural consequence of internal recalibration. Those who once held power through complacency, ignorance, or manipulation suddenly find their methods ineffective. What was normal becomes impossible, and what was overlooked becomes obvious. The brilliance of this kind of reset is that it doesn't require confrontation or performance. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to fight to make things shift. You simply operate differently, with integrity, consistency, and focus, and the world around you must adapt. The reset begins inside, where you control what matters most: your energy, your decisions, and your clarity. Once that foundation is established, everything dependent on the old patterns must either evolve or fall away, leaving space for new structures to emerge naturally. Number 11. You're not here to save anyone. That fantasy delays maturation. Most people grow up with the idea that being powerful or enlightened means rescuing others, fixing their problems, or carrying their weight. That's a comforting story, but it's dangerous because it confuses influence with responsibility and delays growth, both yours and theirs. Real strength doesn't come from saving people. It comes from existing in a state of clarity, stability, and self-mastery that forces others to confront reality on their own terms. You are not the fire extinguisher for someone else's chaos. You are the standard that exposes it. Trying to save people always backfires because it creates dependency. When you step in to fix what someone refuses to face, you reinforce their avoidance. You delay their learning, their accountability, and their internal evolution. Meanwhile, you expend energy that could be used to calibrate yourself, strengthen your own systems, and operate at a higher level. The world rarely rewards rescuers with the respect or understanding they expect. Most people interpret intervention as interference, intrusion, or judgment, and your attempts to help can generate resistance rather than gratitude. The power you actually carry is subtle but profound. It comes from being fully functional without requiring anyone else to adjust to your presence, from holding your own energy steady while the world moves around you. People respond differently when they are forced to confront consequences themselves. They either rise to the occasion or reveal the patterns they've been hiding. Either outcome is clarity, and clarity is far more valuable than temporary comfort. Your role is to radiate stability, insight, and integrity, not to hand-feed solutions. When you embody this, people are challenged without you having to point it out. They are held accountable indirectly through your presence and your refusal to participate in dysfunction. That is influence at its purest. You don't need to intervene to create change. You only need to exist as someone who cannot be manipulated or delayed. And in doing so, you allow the world and the people in it to recalibrate naturally. This is how real growth occurs, and it cannot happen if you are busy trying to be someone else's savior. Number 12, you don't dominate environments, you recalibrate them. Most people think influence means control. They believe power is about asserting dominance, bending situations to their will, or forcing outcomes. That's a shallow understanding. True influence doesn't need to push or coerce. It doesn't operate through fear, intimidation, or volume. Real recalibration happens quietly, almost invisibly, by existing in a way that changes the energy around you. When you operate from clarity, consistency, and internal authority, environments adjust themselves to your presence without a single command. The room doesn't shift because you demanded it. It shifts because your energy sets a new baseline. Recalibration is subtle, but it's devastating to those who rely on chaos, manipulation, or imbalance. People who were once comfortable exploiting flaws suddenly find those flaws irrelevant. Systems that thrived on confusion, inefficiency, or distraction falter because their operating rules no longer apply. You don't need to announce changes or prove anything. You simply function in a state that highlights what works, what doesn't, and what no longer matters. That difference forces adaptation. It forces others to adjust or reveal themselves. This is the kind of power that doesn't tire you out. You're not bending yourself to control outcomes. You're creating conditions where only clarity, integrity, and competence can survive. That is why your presence feels like a shift, even when you say nothing. People are either elevated by it or challenged by it. The ones unwilling to adapt expose their weaknesses, the ones capable rise, and the environment itself begins to function at a higher standard. Recalibration is also self-reinforcing. Once a space adjusts to your energy, the results feed back to you, making subsequent actions smoother, decisions clearer, and influence more natural. You don't fight friction. Friction becomes irrelevant. You don't try to dominate. Dominance bends around your consistency. By simply being, you transform the invisible rules of interaction, structure, and energy. That is why people feel unsettled around you. It isn't aggression. It isn't performance. It's the quiet, inevitable reshaping of everything that once assumed it could remain the same in your presence. Number 13. What's coming isn't chaos. It's exposure. Most people mistake upheaval for chaos, thinking that when systems break, it's random, unpredictable, or uncontrollable. That's not what's happening. What's coming is exposure, the kind that strips away pretense, deception, and illusion. Every lie, every shortcut, every corner someone cut to maintain an image or gain leverage is about to be illuminated. The world doesn't collapse because it's messy. It collapses because it can no longer hide what it truly is. Exposure doesn't yell. It simply reveals. And once truth steps into a room, there's no negotiation. This kind of exposure is uncomfortable for everyone except the prepared. People who built their lives on appearances, manipulation, or false narratives will scramble. They will try to explain, justify, or shift blame. But it's too late. The structures that relied on denial, ignorance, or exploitation cannot function under clarity. Systems falter, relationships crack, and routines that were sustained by convenience start to break. Exposure doesn't destroy, it organizes. It forces alignment, and those who cannot adjust are naturally weeded out. You're witnessing this because your internal order cannot tolerate distortion. You move through life with clarity, consistency, and integrity, which acts like a magnet for truth. People and systems accustomed to bending reality suddenly find themselves unable to operate as they did before. Lies become heavy, manipulations slip, and inefficiencies are laid bare. The discomfort people feel isn't about you personally. It's about their inability to maintain illusions in your presence. Exposure reveals character, competence, and intent, and the results are unavoidable. The brilliance of this phase is that it doesn't require force or drama. You don't have to intervene, argue, or expose anyone. Your presence, your standard, and your refusal to participate in distortion are enough to let the truth rise. What looks like chaos to outsiders is really clarity asserting itself. The world isn't falling apart. It's catching up to reality. And those who can't keep pace are simply being highlighted for what they've always been. Exposure doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't wait for approval. It simply is. Number 14. You were never meant to burn endlessly. You were meant to rise, set, and rise again. The world glorifies relentless energy, constant output, and non-stop hustle, as if exhaustion equals achievement. That's a lie. Your power isn't measured by how much you can give without pause. It's measured by how strategically you deploy your energy when you rise and when you step back to recalibrate. The sun doesn't shine 24/7. It rises, sets, rests in darkness, and rises again with full force. Your rhythm operates the same way. Those who don't understand it see pauses as weakness. But the truth is that restraint preserves power and ensures longevity. You were trained to survive cycles of intensity and withdrawal long before the world understood it. Life demanded you adapt, pause, and observe. You learned that showing all your power at once isn't just inefficient, it's dangerous. The world, especially systems built on manipulation or chaos, cannot tolerate unbridled brilliance. Those who burn without rhythm get exhausted, misread, and consumed. You weren't meant to conform to that model. You were meant to master your timing, your output, and your internal cycles, so that when you rise, your presence cannot be ignored, dismissed, or countered. Rising, setting, and rising again is more than a cycle. It's strategy. Each phase allows you to gather intelligence, refine skill, and recalibrate energy. Each rest is intentional, not passive. Each return is inevitable, unstoppable, and measured. People who mistook your quiet phases for absence will be blindsided by the power of your re-emergence. The rhythm itself becomes a language, an unspoken command that others can't manipulate, accelerate, or disrupt. This cyclical mastery creates resilience and unpredictability simultaneously. You're neither burning out nor burning bridges. You're maintaining a tempo that allows maximum efficiency, influence, and longevity. The brilliance isn't in continuous exertion, it's in sustainable authority, executed with timing, precision, and strategic presence. Every rise feels potent because it's been calibrated, not wasted. Every cycle teaches endurance, patience, and inevitability. You were never meant to exist in constant motion. You were meant to embody cycles, and in doing so, you become unstoppable, enduring, and unforgettable. The journey you've just taken through these points isn't about fantasy, ego, or empty motivation. It's about truth, clarity, and the quiet power that emerges when someone learns to operate on a level few can comprehend. You weren't asleep because you were weak. You were dormant because the world demanded it. Your body, mind, and energy systems were training you for precision, restraint, and inevitability. You learned to stabilize, to embody coherence, and to recalibrate environments without ever needing permission or applause. Every obstacle, every delay, every friction point in your life wasn't a setback. It was preparation. It shaped a version of you that could endure, observe, and ultimately operate at a level where influence doesn't need to be performed. It simply exists. You don't chase power or recognition. You don't save or rescue to feed someone else's illusion of dependency. Your power is subtle, unshakable, and undeniable, because it manifests in what stops working around you, in the way systems, patterns, and people are forced to adjust to your presence. The reset you're witnessing isn't cosmic. It's a systemic correction that responds naturally to clarity, integrity, and the refusal to participate in dysfunction. What looks like chaos to outsiders is really exposure, the unmasking of false narratives, shortcuts, and illusions that have run their course. And through it all, your energy follows the rhythm of the sun itself, rising, setting, and rising again, never wasted, never overstretched, always calibrated for maximum impact. This is the essence of operating at a level that the world struggles to understand. It's not flashy, it's not performative. It's a force that reorganizes everything it touches, a quiet inevitability that others will either rise to meet or be exposed by. You are living proof that real power, real influence, and real transformation don't need permission. They need patience, clarity, and an unwavering commitment to being fully aligned with yourself. If this message resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss insights like these. Hit the like button to show support, comment your thoughts so we can continue the conversation, and share this video with anyone who needs to understand the quiet, unstoppable power of operating on your own level. Your presence matters, and the world is finally catching up to what you've been mastering all along. Stay blessed always.